Okay, so this particular lecture is going to cover three short little topics. The first one that we're going to talk about will be epithelial membranes. It's very, very quick, just a slide or two. Then we're going to very briefly discuss muscular tissue. But once again, we're going to talk about muscular tissue a lot more in depth when we get to the muscular system. And then we're going to look at nervous tissue, which is actually the same type of situation. We'll look at it when we get to the nervous system. So let's start with epithelial membranes. So we've already talked about epithelial tissue. So what makes epithelial membranes different? Well, basically, it's a multicellular sheet of epithelial cells, and that particular, it could be made up of more than one type of epithelial membrane or epithelial cell as well. And so what happens is they line the body cavities, or they are found on the skin or make up the skin. So they fall into three categories or three classes. We have cutaneous, which is the skin, then we have mucous membranes, and then we have what's known as serous membranes. So cutaneous membranes or skin, this is epithelial tissue that is exposed to air, and because of that, it is considered a dry membrane. The next one is a mucous membrane. This is an epithelial tissue that is found in the body cavities, lining any body cavity that opens up to the exterior. So, like your respiratory passages would be a good example. Mucous membranes are wet membranes because they produce a mucus that spills out over the membrane, that traps things that could be dangerous. It warms up the air. So it has several different purposes. And then the third type of epithelial membrane, this is also a wet membrane or moist membrane. This one is different from mucus because in this case, the cavity does not open to the outer, environment. So it's in a closed body cavity. And this one doesn't produce like a thick mucus like mucous membranes do. Instead, it produces a very thin, clear fluid that lubricates and reduces friction. This, a good example of this would be in our pleural cavity around our lungs. When you breathe in and out, your lungs will rub against the pleural cavity. Well, there is a thin coating of this serous membrane or serous fluid that's produced by the serous membrane that allows your lungs to be able to breathe in a friction-free environment. Same thing around your heart. And we'll talk more about how that helps your heart when we get to the circulatory system. But that serous membrane produces that serous fluid, which provides a friction-free environment. So that's it for membranes. So the next thing would be nervous tissue. And like I said, with nervous tissue, we're going to talk about it much more in depth later. Right now, we're just kind of hitting a couple quick highlights. So nervous tissue is what makes up our nervous system. It's the main component of the nervous system. And when we talk about the nervous tissue, there's two major cell types. One are the neurons, and neurons are very specialized nerve cells, and they generate and conduct impulses. So when our brain tells our body to do something, it has to follow this long connection of neurons that allow that message to get to its final destination. Around that neuron, you will find supporting cells, and their job is not necessarily to conduct that information. Their job is to support and protect the neurons that are doing the conduction of that information. And so they're made of nervous tissue. And I always tell students, I always remember what nervous tissue looks like because it looks like spiders, and spiders kind of make me nervous. And then that brings us to our final topic for today, which is muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is highly cellular, very vascularized, And that's important because we need to be able to get oxygen to our muscles and pick up waste and bring it away. So, muscle tissue is responsible for all of our movement. Without muscle tissue, you couldn't move. So, we have three types. We have skeletal muscle, which looks striated when you look at it under the microscope, and striated means that it looks striped. Smooth muscle is called smooth muscle because when you look at it under the microscope, it looks pink and just one smooth layer. So that's why they gave it the name smooth. And then we have cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle, of course, is found in our heart, and it is also striated. And I do want to point out that skeletal muscle is under our control, meaning that if I want to make my arm move, my brain tells my arm to move because that muscle is commanded by the neurons from my brain and I have control over them. And so 99.9% of the time, I have control over my skeletal muscles. Your smooth muscle and cardiac muscle are involuntary, and that's what this is right here, involuntary, because that means that your brain tells them what to do without you having to think about it consciously. It's an autonomic response. So your heart doesn't need to be told beat, 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 beat. It gets its own information from the brain without us having to tell it what to do. And here's some pictures of it. This is the skeletal muscle, this is smooth muscle, and then this is our cardiac muscle. So that ends our lecture today. We have one more lecture remaining, which is on our discussion question. So I once again highly suggest that you go back, read through all of your notes, read through your text, rewatch the lectures to be prepared for your unit exam. Thank you.